I want to introduce you to a friend of mine tonight, and he actually doesn't know me, and I've never met him, none of which is surprising because he lived 3,500 years ago. It's Joshua, of course, but Joshua is one of the people that God tells us about in the Bible, with the effect that the more we read about them and understand about how they lived their lives, we come to know them as friends. And I hope that's going to be true of you. If it's not happened already, and maybe it has, but if you've not up to now regarded Joshua as your friend, I hope by the end of this week, you'll, like me, think of Joshua as being a friend. Here's a question for you. What is the first book in the Bible? Wait for it. What is the first book in the Bible that has as its title a man's name? You can shout out. Don't be afraid of getting it wrong. What's the first book in the Bible that has a man's name? Joshua. Yeah, thanks. Joshua. Let me tell you who comes before Joshua. This is a list of the greats, right? Adam, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. Huge number of chapters in Genesis written about Joseph. Moses. How much do we read about Moses? And yet none of those men have a book named after them. And you have to come to Joshua. And I heard somebody say once, it's as if God is saying to us what he one day said to Satan. And he said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? And you get through all these list of greats in the first 5 books of the Bible. And it's as if God comes to you and says, if you considered my servant Joshua, I've mentioned him to you, but now I'm going to write a book and I'll put his name at the head of it. And I want you to think about his life. I should say to you, by the way, that this week's study is not on the book of Joshua per se. There are things in the book of Joshua that we'll probably not touch on this week. There's a lot more in that book than we've put into our studies. What we're really looking at this week is the character of the man. We're looking at the man, Joshua, rather than the book. Let's have a look at the first time that he's mentioned. So if you have book of Exodus, chapter 17. Exodus chapter 17. And read with me, please, from verse 8. I've realized I'm reading from the New King James. If that's a little strange to you, and if it's you'll work it out. Exodus chapter 17, verse 8. Now Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. And Moses said to Joshua, and that's the first time we read his name in the Bible. Moses said to Joshua, choose us some men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. So Joshua did, as Moses said to him, and he fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And so it was when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands became heavy, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. So Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. The Lord said to Moses, write this for a memorial in the book and recount it in the hearing of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Moses built an altar and called its name, the Lord is my banner, for he said, because the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. When Joshua was called by Moses, and Moses said to him, I want you to get some men together, it's not really an army, put together a cohort, an army, and go out and deal with this threat. Go and fight against Amalek. I reckon he was probably in his late 30s or perhaps even 40 years old. Now, don't take my word for it. You can check it yourselves. There's a book in the book of the word in a verse in the book of Judges, chapter 2, verse 7, I think. It tells us the age that Joshua was when he died. You can do the maths and work it back and so on. But I'm going to say to you that I'm pretty sure by this time in Exodus 17, Joshua is around about 40 years old. Now that means something. It means that everything else is written in the book of Exodus up to that point, so the first 17 chapters, Joshua must have experienced, because all of that happened well within 40 years. So that's really, really interesting, because we can now take our look at Joshua, the character of the man, and project it back a little bit into the book of Exodus, even though it doesn't mention his name, because we can be certain that he experienced the things that the earlier chapters of Exodus write about. And that's really all I want to take you through very briefly tonight. Let's go through these together, because here he is, the battle with Amalek. That's chapter 17. And we're going to look at the things that preceded that. So turn right back to the beginning, Exodus chapter 1 with me, please. Exodus 1, verse 8 we'll start at. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And it happens in the event of war that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom, Ramesses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were in dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar, in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service in which they made them serve was with rigor. It was tough. So that's the that's the beginning of the life that Joshua knew. And I don't think he never knew anything different to that, because this went back before he was born. So for the first 30-something years of Joshua's life, he lived growing up in a society in which he saw his mum and dad suffer. He saw his friends and his neighbors. He saw all the people of the Hebrew nation suffer because they were slaves. And they seemed to be going deeper and deeper into that slavery, and the whole thing seemed useless. And if he ever came across an Egyptian, and I don't know whether he did, but if he did in the street or at some time or other, these guys sort of looked down on them and looked suspiciously at them. There was hatred in the air. You could cut the atmosphere with a knife. That's the world that Joshua grew up in. And we need to carry that forward when we're thinking about him this week together. That really is the beginning of the thing with Joshua. Where it begins. Let's have a look at another one. So we'll put up the first one, life in Egypt. That's Exodus chapter 1. Have a look at chapter 3 with me. Turn over. Exodus chapter 3, verse 7. This is God now speaking to Moses. I'm flicking through these, by the way, and if you're not familiar with any of these passages, I know you'll take them back and read them in your own time. But you all know about the burning bush, I think, and God speaking to Moses here, and this is what he says to him. He says in verse 7 of chapter 3, the Lord said, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrow, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from that land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come up to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come now therefore, and I will send you," speaking to Moses, "I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." I don't know how it happened in Joshua's realization of it, but there must have come a day in Joshua's life when he was aware that the people, his people, were talking about something in a really animated way. There was change in the air. Something's happened. I can't say for sure exactly how it happened. The Bible doesn't tell us, so we must be careful with speculation. But somehow Joshua got to hear that Moses had visited Egypt. Now that's significant because he'd never met Moses, but Moses had been born as he had been in Egypt, and 40 years before Moses had left Egypt. Moses was a Hebrew like Joshua, but he'd been brought up in Pharaoh's palace. You know the story. Baby hidden in the bulrushes and all that. And when he was about 40 years old, Moses had seen two men fighting. And there was an Egyptian. Actually, they weren't really fighting. There was an Egyptian, and he was being tough on one of the Hebrews. So Moses went to intervene, and I don't think he actually meant to, but he ended up killing the Egyptian. And he buried him and thought nobody knew about it. And afterwards he found out people did know about it, and he fled for his life. And he went away for 40 years. And then God spoke to him and said, "Moses, you're going back, because I know how tough it is for my people living in slavery in Egypt. I'm going to bring them out, and I'm sending you to take the message." So Moses goes back with the message. Remember Joshua, he's just been growing up for his last 40 years in Egypt. And he must have heard that Moses has appeared. You mean the Moses his parents and other people had taught? Yeah, that Moses. He's come back, and he's told us, he's a man with the message. He's told us that our God actually knows about our predicament. He's not forgotten us. And our ancestor Joseph spoke about us going up out of it. It's going to happen because this man Moses has come back with the message. He says God's going to take us out of here, take us to our own land. It's the second thing. Must have made a big impact on Joshua. Moses, the man with the message. We're not going to work all the way through all these, by the way. We'd be here all night. But just turn over with me to chapter 7. And we're not going to read these, and you'll soon realize why. Because they run through chapter 7, 8, 9, 10, and then again in 12. So we haven't got time for that. But you're turning them over. You can see them in your Bibles. You can go back to them and figure where they are. We've gone from 1 to 3, now to 7. And you can fill in all the other bits as well. But what happened was that when Moses came with his message to Pharaoh, Pharaoh didn't think it was such a good idea to let God's people go. They are, after all, my slave builders. I'm getting a lot of stuff done with these people, and we can really lean on them, and we get results. So he says, "I will let him go," and then he changed his mind. He didn't let him go. Anyway, you probably know those chapters 7, 8, 9, and 10. God sent plagues into Egypt to change Pharaoh's mind again and again and again. A plague of turning the water into blood, the plague of frogs, the plague of lice, the plague of flies, the plague of livestock disease, the plague of boils, the plague of hail, the plague of locusts, the plague of darkness. That doesn't sound such a big thing, is it, until you think about it? And it's darkness where, not just not so light, it was darkness that might be felt. It's like being completely blind. That was the 9th plague. And the 10th and final one was the death of the firstborn. These were terrible, terrible things that God brought into the land of Egypt. And Joshua witnessed all of them. He saw it happening. He heard the cries of people. He saw how it was affecting people. Our Joshua, this man we're going to look to as a friend, witnessed all that. The plagues, Exodus 7, 8, 9, 10, and 12. chapter 12. We'll probably just read a bit out of this one. Verse 21. Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said to them, pick out and take lambs for yourselves according to your families. Kill the Passover lamb, and you shall take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, strike the lintel and the 2 doorposts with the blood that is in the basin. And none of you shall go out of the door of this house until morning. For the Lord will pass through to strike the Egyptians. And when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and not allow the destroyer to come into your house to strike you. And you shall observe this thing as an ordinance for you and your sons forever. It will come to pass when you come to the land which the Lord will give you, just as he promised, you shall keep this service. It shall be when your children say to you, what do you mean? You'll explain it to them. Joshua experienced the Passover, the first Passover. And according to the instruction that Moses brought from God, the family of Joshua must have taken a lamb. They did it on the 10th day of this new month that God had ordained for them. And they chose it. They had to look out. They had to be a lamb that wasn't limping, a lamb that was perfect as far as they could see. And they said, that's going to be our lamb. They chose it on the 10th day. They kept it on the 11th, the 12th, the 13th. 3 whole days they kept that lamb. And on the 14th day, they killed it. And they took the blood and they applied it to the lintel and the 2 doorposts. And then they stayed in the house that night, because the angel of death came in with the Lord. And the Lord passed over, which is a word that means he protected, he stayed over. That doesn't mean he passed over and on somewhere else. It means he protected it. And he said to the angel of death, you're not coming in here. This is protected, this is protected, this is protected. Joshua knew all that. That's Exodus 12, the Passover. We're going to have to run through these now because it'll take far too long. But Exodus 14, there was the crossing of the Red Sea. This was the Sinai Peninsula, and probably this was the crossing over here, which is the Gulf of Aqaba. This was Egypt up here, the Mediterranean Sea, Red Sea down here, Dead Sea here, Midian here, which is probably where Sinai is, but you can't tell the tourist board that because they insist it's over there. But anyway, they crossed the Red Sea. Joshua was there. And by this time, he's, say, about 40, late 30s, 40. And he's taking all this in. He's experienced all the things that we've said about, all his life, the hardship, the message that Moses brought, the Passover, the going out of Egypt. The Egyptians said, get out of here, please leave us. We've had enough, go, go, go. And then God told them to camp at a particular place. And he gave them a 3-point map reference, which meant there was a precise place where they were to camp. God took them there. It was a cul-de-sac. And Pharaoh, true to his changeable mind, thought, I'm going to bring them back again. So he got his crack troops and he said, you go out and bring them back. So Pharaoh's troops are now closing the back door, and they were in a cul-de-sac. They were cut off by mountains and the sea in front of them, and Pharaoh's closing the back door. And they cried to Moses, what are we going to do? Moses goes to the Lord. The Lord says, why are you crying to me? Tell the people to go forward. Forward? There's the sea. But you know what happened? God parted the sea. Joshua went through the Red Sea on dry land. I mean, personally, Joshua, our man. I don't know if you've ever thought about it. I've often thought, and you have to be careful with pictures because they're so inaccurate, many of them drive you mad. So I don't think it was a little narrow path. It was a lot of people that went across the Red Sea. So, but whatever, they would have seen water, a wall of water either side. Because God parted it, not like the Jordan, it was different. But he parted it, so there's a wall of water. And you're crossing over, and it's quite a crossing. It wasn't a little hop and a skip and a jump. You know, they're going, and you're thinking, you're looking at the other side and doing calculations. If that wall comes down, are we going to make it across the other side? Joshua, I don't know what went through his mind, but he went through that experience of crossing the Red Sea. And he stood on the other side, and David was talking about the great song of victory that they sang, looking back. Actually, Pharaoh's troops came in and the waters came and God delivered them from them. They were never going to see them again. They were not going back to slavery. That was not a possibility. It wasn't on the agenda. God had not only brought them out, he had now shut the door on the Egyptians, and Israel's being brought to him, and he's going to lead them to the land. Joshua experienced all that. That's Exodus 14. And then they got over to the other side, I think the land of Midian, and in Exodus 15, there was some bitter water. They tasted it, and maybe Joshua tasted it. And they said, this is no good. We need good water. And the Lord showed Moses a tree. He says, you throw the tree in the water became sweet. And Joshua maybe tasted that as well. You certainly wouldn't have forgotten Elim, which was an oasis that God took them to, palm trees, beautiful water, and a place of rest, like a holiday camp. Oh, no, not like a holiday camp at all, like a holiday. Joshua experienced all that. That's Exodus 15. And then they didn't have food to eat, so they complained again, and God sent them bread from heaven. Manna, they called it, because they didn't what manna means. What is it? So they didn't have a word for it. They'd never seen this before. It was like frost, very small white thing on the ground. And they went out every day and got it 6 days. And on the 6th day, they had to get enough for 2 days, not the other days, but only on that day, because the 7th day there was none. And then on the first day of the week again, it started again, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, so on. So, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. The Sabbath was Saturday. Yeah, you figured that out. Anyway, they had food that God provided for them. Then they ran out of water. That's Exodus 16. And then they ran out of water, and they said, we've nothing to drink here. And God said to Moses, you take the rod that you stretched out over the rivers in Egypt and turn them to blood. Now you strike this rock with it. And he struck the rock, and water came out of the rock, and they had water to drink. I just got to think of Joshua drinking this water, eating this manna, of tasting this water here and enjoying Elim, of crossing the Red Sea, of experiencing the Passover, all these things. Why is it important? Because this brings you to Exodus 17. Exodus 17, that's where we started. That's the battle with Amalek. And a man whom Moses comes to and says to him, I want you to take men and go out and fight with Amalek, is a man who's experienced all of these things. And that's important. What a difference it must have made to Moses, to Joshua, when Moses called him that day and said, Joshua, take men, go and deal with this threat. To have looked back on his 40-something, 30-something, 40 years and thought, I've experienced a lot of interesting things, life-changing things, and it's made me fit for the task of this moment. What really had Joshua learned from God in his experiences? He had learned that God knows about us and cares about us, that the predicament in Egypt was known in heaven, and God knew and heard and had come down to deliver people. He knew that God would send somebody to rescue them. He knew that God was a God of power in judgment. Think of the plagues that Joshua had witnessed. He knew that God was a God who was powerful in salvation, parting of the Red Sea, the destruction of Pharaoh's army. He knew that a substitutionary death was necessary for salvation. A lamb had to die in order that the firstborn from all his nation could live. He knew all that. And he knew that God was a God who would provide for the needs of his people, even in the most impossible of circumstances. Joshua, at this point, knew all of those things. And then he was prepared to go out and fight with Amalek. We have to say, guys, how does that apply to us? Where are we in our experience in the things of God? And at what point have we reached where we can face Amalek? And you think you're going to say, well, what's facing Amalek? Who's Amalek? Amalek was an enemy of the people of God, about whom God said, I'm going to have war with them from generation to generation. This is going to go on and on and on until they're utterly destroyed. This is an implacable enemy. It doesn't go away. And if you read your Bibles and check up the times that Amalek and Amalekites appear in the Bible, You see, they keep popping up like really bad things. They're always there, and they're always trying to destroy. You know, in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul, by the Spirit of God, tells us that we have an enemy, that's Satan and all the hosts of wickedness. But we have an enemy within. We have something we're battling with within ourselves, and it's our, what the Bible calls our flesh. It's our carnal nature. It's the things that are in opposition to our spiritual nature when we get saved. When we get saved, we have a new nature, and the two natures are in opposition. And it's from generation to generation. It's a lifelong battle, struggle. You know how you're going to deal with it? By knowing the experiences that Joshua knew, up to the point of going out to fight with Amalek. And if you do, you'll be fit to deal with that. You need to know God. You need to know God as a God of judgment, powerful in judgment, powerful in salvation. You need to know the great substitutionary work of Christ, that he died for us as our Passover lamb, and that because of him we live. You need to know the deliverance that God's given us from sin, that we don't need to sin, because once we're saved, we have an ability to live for him. It's the great teaching in Romans chapter 6, that we can live victorious lives over sin. You can actually win the battle against Amalek, just as Joshua did. One last thing. I've called here Joshua a man for all seasons. I don't know whether you're aware of where that comes from. Robert Brooke, I think his name was Robert Bolt, wrote a play in the 1950s, and he called it A Man for All Seasons, and it was a play about Sir Thomas More. Zimmerman directed and produced a film in the 1960s, 1966, I think, based on Bolt's book. And it was about Sir Thomas More. Sir Thomas More was the Lord Chancellor of Henry VIII. And the book and the film, if you ever come across them, the film is a classic. I suppose the book is. It's about the last 5 years of Sir Thomas More's life as Henry VIII's Chancellor, up to the point where Henry VIII had him executed at Tower Hill in London. The phrase, a man for all seasons, what does it mean? It means somebody who is up to changing circumstances, able to meet them, able to deal with things as they come, and is unshaken and unmoved. A person of integrity, a person of moral strength, able to meet whatever life throws. Guys, I hope that's your aim in life. That you and I will be men and women for all seasons. Because we don't know what seasons lie ahead of us. There could be a whole lot of things. There will be a whole lot of things that lie ahead of you that won't be for me unless the Lord comes. This world is changing. It's a very strange world we live in, and it's getting stranger by the minute. And you're facing difficulties that I never faced at your age. And you need to be women and men for all seasons, for the seasons that are coming. Because that's exactly what Joshua was. But what made him like that? What made him fit for purpose? A man of integrity, a man who kept calm under the greatest of pressures. You up for that? Then befriend Joshua and notice the things in his life that lie before the time that we hear his name mentioned in the Bible. And carry that forward in your studies this week as we think about him. I've probably gone on far too long, David. Let's have a prayer.